Yeah, welcome everybody. This is the next in our series of innovation webinars where we look at a particular slice of innovation performance, some kind of interesting topic in the innovation management world, and we do a bit of a dive into that topic. And yeah, welcome, and it's great to have so many of you here. If you haven't listened to any of the previous sessions, as part of the follow-up that we send back to you, we'll provide some links to some of the previous sessions. We had really great topics on things like innovation portfolio management, employee engagement, innovation measures. There's all kinds of different things that have been part of this series. And yeah, it's building up a really nice community of people who are interested in talking about innovation performance and how we can get better at this wonderful world that we live in. For those of you who have joined us before, you'll be aware that as part of this, we draw one or two names out of a random hat in terms of offering you a free consultation on your innovation program. So there will be this QR code at the end of the session as well, but you can take a picture now. There's a little survey to complete, some feedback on the session. It's always great to hear what you think, maybe area topics that you're interested in the future, and area things that we can do to improve. But anyway, anyone that completes that survey will get put into a hat, and you will get a little time with me just to talk about any aspect of your innovation program. Now, before we get started, I'm going to start off with a story, and I like stories. It's the best way of getting information across in my experience. I'm going to indicate a story that shows an opportunity for us to improve our innovation work using AI. And this goes back a few years when I was working with a French automotive company. And what they wanted to do, similar to building on what you're saying, Brian, was they wanted to engage around 10,000 engineers on new digital features they wanted to see in cars. Now, this is obviously a big topic, and it's a topic that perhaps is open to a lot of expansive thinking. And I remember sitting with the leadership team and asking them, how many ideas could you feasibly process? I mean, 10,000 people with such a big open question, you could get quite a lot of content. What if you got 1,000 submissions on this topic? Now, initially, the answer was, well, we want as many as possible. And then we talked a little bit about processing 1,000 different pieces of content, and they realized that was going to be an overwhelming task. And on one hand, their HR department was very passionate about engaging people, and they saw this as a great way of increasing the conversation, but also the practicalities of being able to process all of that content, take reasonable action, and communicate back were overwhelming. So they realized, yes, you're right, 1,000 submissions will be too many. We need a way of tightening this question up and making sure it's nice and focused. So we tightened the question up, we ran that challenge, and hey, we got it wrong. We had around 1,500 submissions and around 3,500 comments on those submissions, so nearly 5,000 things to read. And of course, a human being cannot process that amount of content. And so, of course, what we had to do in those circumstances, going back a few years, was actually to use the crowd opinion, the popularity of that content as a way of making some decisions on the initial content. So if the 1,500 or so submissions, only about 100 were ever read, which still burns my soul. As a passionate corporate innovator, I still struggle with that because I know there was things that were left on the desk that we never got to, stuff that maybe was on the fringes, the more adventurous things that we simply didn't get a chance to process. And that's one example of where a machine can now help us quite a bit in terms of processing larger amounts of data. And I'm going to dig back into this story a little bit later as we progress. So a little scene setting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chief Innovation Consultant here at Hype. I've been working in corporate innovation for more than 20 years, mostly in terms of helping organizations with improving innovation performance. I was a former corporate entrepreneur myself, doing the regular day job of innovating within the technology space for nearly a decade. But yeah, as I said, for the last 15, 20 years or so, I've been working with a real wide variety of different organizations, everyone from sports organizations to automotive to NGOs and people like the United Nations. And what they all have in common is this desire to change things for the better and to innovate their way forward as organizations. A little bit for you about Hype. For those of you who don't know us, we're a software and services company operating in the innovation management space, operating globally, but an awful lot in the Western world. Typically medium to large sized organizations are our client base, and they often come with scale problems and challenges associated with that. We've got 500-600 clients worldwide. And we work very closely with our clients. We're not an organization just throw some software over the wall and walks away. So myself and the other consultants at Hype, we really try to understand an organization's culture, its structure, its objectives, so that when we're guiding them towards this path towards improving innovation performance, it's always within the context of what they're trying to do. So let's dig into some of the topics for today. So I'll set the scene a little bit about AI and why this is interesting, and introduce this concept of autonomous innovation, way of trying automating elements of the innovation management process. But the bulk of the conversation I want to have to do today is the bottom three bullets. I want to talk about innovation headaches, things that are hard or impossible today that machines are now making possible or easier or faster than they ever have been before. And I'm going to phrase them in this realm of innovation headaches. And then we're going to talk about the sort of ibuprofen of the world, the AI medication that potentially can help us address those topics. But I also want to be a realist here. Through the work that my colleagues and I have done, what we also see are there some limits to what AI can do. Some of them are current limits that eventually will be resolved, and some of them perhaps are limits that we'll always have in place. But I want to dig into those as well, because there are some practical considerations that we need to think about when it comes to utilizing AI to improve our innovation performance. So we'll talk a little bit about how AI is accelerating this space, how we can get more from our greatest resources, our people and our data, perhaps uncover things that we simply could not see before, and how automation is going to help us set strategic direction in the future. And I sort of summarize this in terms of getting faster, better, and more differentiated. And this is within the wider context that organizations face of becoming more agile, um, better differentiated, more immune to regular disruptions that we see all the time, of course, within our businesses. What we see when we look at organizational life cycles is they're shorter and shorter. As big companies struggle to pivot and adapt to new circumstances. And innovation is often seen as a vehicle towards creating more agility, but an AI is going to be embedded in every element of it moving forward if it isn't already. A couple of sort of scene setting elements just to help illustrate where I'm going to be operating within the innovation landscape, because innovation is a big, big world. These are four major areas that we typically find ourselves working, which are hot topics for innovation performance. So I'm going to go around this like a clock, and I'm going to reference back to these points as we go through some of those innovation headaches and medication, because hopefully that will help put it into context where we're operating. So the first one is listening better. Can we absorb external signals, the trends, the technologies, the new patents, the research, the insights from an employee that just saw something at a conference? Can we get better at absorbing those signals, organizing them, and use them to support our strategic direction as an organization? That's a scale problem, and there are opportunities for AI to help us with that. Moving around, we move into employee engagement. Many of us have more employees than we can fit in a room. So can we ideate with employees? Can we problem solve together? Can we deal with the amount of data that is generated by involving large amounts of employees? Very much synonymous with that example I gave earlier about the French automotive company. Moving around to the value chain. I referenced a moment ago about trying to become more agile as organizations. Well, a big part of that is actually working with more external partners, organizations that have really taken the investment step before we have, reducing the risk a little bit in terms of our innovation energies. So value chain engagement and seeing how we can help automate elements of that is also an interesting area of automation and opportunity. The final piece of the puzzle that we tend to work with is more the portfolio space. I'm not going to dig into this too much today, but this will help indicate. Wow, we have some drawings from Hitendra there, so thank you for a bit of a creative license there on my slides. Hopefully not. We don't have too much more of that. The joys of having a meeting rather than a webinar. So yeah, just to kind of finally focus on execution area. This is a data source for many, let's say, opportunities for innovation curation. So I'm going to dig into this maybe just slightly as we move forward. All right, so diversity of opinion brings creativity. I want to dig into that bottom right-hand quadrant for a second. So this employee engagement area, because in many ways, what we've done in the past with human beings is something that we can now automate and extend and augment with machines. No problem, Hitendra. I'm sure we'll find a way of removing that in a second. We often think about collective intelligence. And this is just a bit of scene setting here, because when we think about collective intelligence, we're thinking about what's sat in people's minds typically, what's in their imagination, what's in their experiences. And as we go through extra layers of our organizational onions, what we see is we get more diversity of perspective, more diversity of opinion, and then we get more creativity. And in many ways, we've got our internal organization, we've got our external organizations, our partners, but we've also got now an opportunity to bring in an extra layer of the onion, more insights, observations than perhaps we've ever had before, provided by a machine. Now, there are some limits to what that can do, and I'll highlight those later, but just a way to think about this area of augmenting the innovation world is an extra layer of the onion. I like to think about it that way. So another bit of scene setting. Innovation is a big world, as I mentioned earlier before, and in the past we tended to think about innovation purely as being new products, new processes, and business models. And there was a time, of course, which was very much an R&D only activity, or considered that way. But in many cases, a lot of the things that we talk about today are also just as applicable in the efficiency world. And we see many organizations using innovation tools and processes to help supercharge business performance, reducing costs, supercharging continuous improvement. These are just as valuable in organizations. In fact, sit in parallel to many of the more further out, broader reaching innovative topics that we think about. What we also see is a lot of organizations using innovation tools to support their sustainability initiatives and, of course, transformation as well. So I'm going to probably not dig into these things too much, but just so you get a sense of all of this stuff is important in different magnitudes, perhaps, and AI has opportunities to support us in all these different realms. We may well just touch back on a few of these points as we go through. So I have this concept of autonomous innovation to talk about. And this is about taking a lot of the manual activities when it comes to innovation management and trying to automate them where possible. I haven't yet seen a situation where we can move the human being completely, but there are elements where we're dealing with quantity of data, or we are trying to gain insights from places that we just simply couldn't see, practically couldn't get to in the past. So maybe it's helpful for everybody just to see this sort of innovation management timeline. Back when I was entering into this innovation management industry, innovation essentially was an R&D based process. It might have been business development in some cases as well, where organizations were forming partnerships, but innovation really was limited to those areas in a lot of organizations. And then we moved in this realm around the 2000s of sort of systematic innovation management, or organizations dipping into the process of actually, we need to continually innovate to survive and thrive. And this is going to be crucial for us moving forward. So let's think about how we can put the processes in place to continually innovate. More recently, we've seen this massive increase in organizational agility, or desire for more agility. And for those of you not sure what that means in the context of what I'm talking about here, it's about having more options. It's about being able to be flexible. It's about to pivot more quickly. It's about being able to say, well, if this part of our business struggles due to other factors, maybe sustainability or other trends, then we may pivot into a new area to explore. But this new realm, the realm that we're entering now, is autonomous innovation management, where we're taking slices of our innovation management process and the machine is doing a lot of the work for us. And my dream scenario, and we're not quite there yet, but I think we're heading in a really good direction, is for the machine to be able to look at everything that we've got and to be fed our areas of interest, and then to look at everything that's available in the outside world, and then provide to us on a plate, these are the new areas you should explore. And we can trace that back as to the why. So we know what we know, the machine knows what else is out there, and we have this intersection between those two. I don't think we're too far away from that. There are some limits, which I will come on to later, but I think that's the kind of the direction of travel that we're heading. In terms of our language, and when I talk about these headaches and medication, I want to break them into these four major themes. So there's the augmenting piece, so complementing human creativity. How do we use the machine to make it a little bit better than it is today, a little richer, maybe starting a little bit easier, basically sort of slickening up the process a little bit more. Then we have assisting, so analyzing and dealing with large amounts of data and information more quickly. I've touched upon that several times already, but this is areas where, in many cases, things that weren't possible before are now much more possible. Acceleration, so accelerating the pace of innovation, collecting information, making decisions on prototyping, taking that innovation funnel that we have and then making that process a little faster because of elements of automation and being able to dig into things in a different kind of way than we perhaps did before. And then finally, automation. So this is streamlining those normal labor processes. Think about communications, assessment of content, helping that's going to release some capacity and hopefully improve our effectiveness as well. So you'll see me drawing back on these four themes as we go through. And yes, the pictures that you see there have been created by AI, if you're wondering. So Just a little bit about Hype. We don't typically talk too much about our software capabilities here at Hype on these webinars. This is more the people, process, cultural conversations. But I think there are some areas that I want to just reference because I'm going to use our experiences as a technology company as an illustration through today. And those are three major areas that we're spending our time for those of you who are newer to the, let's say, the AI language. So machine learning. So these are things where we're looking at organizational specific models and pipelines and creating extensible architectures that we can use to build in other different types of data sets. We've got generative AI, of course. This is the one that most people tend to think about, so creating something from content that's already out there. But there's also some small, like say, smart capabilities that we are exploring as well. So this could be where we're building, some proprietary data and content using some of our own algorithms to make things that perhaps were a little bit burdensome in the past a little bit easier. But our vision, traditionally as an organization, is a sort of a future-proof AI architecture, which has lots of flexibility, but with trust and compliance in mind. Because we're also aware that certain businesses and organizations, we can't just put AI in every aspect of what we do. There will be some restrictions to that. And again, we'll touch upon some of those a little bit later. So let's get on to our innovation headaches. And these are a collection of challenges that I've seen over the years due to various reasons that I think are opportunities for us to make our lives a little bit better using machines. And I'm going to go through them one by one and just give you a bit of a sense of what that typical problem is. But they took different slices of the innovation management world. So the first one I'm going to deal with is inspiration. Now, in the past, what we might have done when we're trying to do idea creation type activities, ask our people just come up with something, just create something. And often we lack a bit of context, some examples that are similar from adjacent areas, but these are really important in getting the imagination to start working. If we can try to create inspirational content, that takes a lot of time. It slows down that creative process. But this is definitely an opportunity for AI to help us. Because what we find is if we can offer people inspiration, if we can offer them some starting points, they tend to generate more creative and better solutions. So that's our first one we talk about. The next one's overlap. We just find that a lot of organizations have huge amounts of innovation work that's happening in parallel in different silos and isn't shared. And there's huge amounts of overlap in the innovation data world. I had a client recently that looked at their innovation partnerships. So basically organizations they were working with where they were doing something together to create something new. And they found they had 7 different contracts with the same organization in different parallel divisions working on similar stuff. Overlap is a massive problem for us as innovators because it is an absolute capacity burden. When we tend to think about innovation, some people still think invention rather than collaboration. Could we team up? Could we build upon what's already existing? These are common challenges that every organization faces. And sometimes the same stuff is just expressed differently, but we can't see it. Maybe it's due to language, or maybe it's due to semantics, or maybe it's just due to a different framing within a different area. Again, these are areas where the machine can potentially make our lives an awful lot easier, be that curation and removing duplication, or trying to break down the things that are expressed in different ways. I talked about the example from the French automotive company earlier, quantity, dealing with large amounts of data. Large amounts of ideas, insights, numbers of concepts, trying to discover what has the most merit most quickly. So we spend our precious time on the best stuff, not just processing everything. The quicker we can focus on the right ideas and solutions, the better we are going to be in terms of making sure we have confidence when making use of our capacity in the best ways. And again, we've had some experiments with this and found that AI definitely has a role to play. And I'll dig into that more in a little bit when we talk about the medication side of things. Language. So I've been working in this industry for a long time. And let me tell you a very quick story. I was working with a telecommunications company that had 30,000 people worldwide and one division per country. And they were all innovating separately. We wanted to try and bring them together, all 30,000 people, to try and innovate together. But of course, language became the first and critical point of challenge because, frankly speaking, in that organization, not everybody spoke the so-called corporate language. We actually discovered that across the 13 or so divisions, there were 4 languages or 5 languages that probably needed to be utilized in order to include everybody. So the people that spoke the corporate language or spoke it pretty well, and then there were people that simply didn't speak it at all. So we had to generate ideas in silos in their own language and then have them translated manually to then be assessed and compared with others. Now, this was going back sort of 15 or so years, but this was the world that we lived in. Um, Most organizations these days of any kind of size are operating in multiple territories around the world, and that means multiple languages. And sometimes not everybody speaks the language of the corporate equally well. And that can stifle innovation, it can stifle collaboration because people will be resistant to sharing if it's not in their native language. So again, this is one area where there's been tremendous strides forwards in terms of language translation and automating that process, which is very, very helpful for us. One of the areas I'm most excited about, though, is curation. So actually exploiting all the innovation data that we have. We've got insights and problems and ideas and concepts and trends and technologies and partnerships. How do we see the wood for the trees? We've got some clients that have 300 or 400,000 different data points on different parts of innovation. Now, and they've been building that for 20 years. Now, if we could look at it over time, what are the trends that have emerged in terms of that innovation data? If we could look at the connections between people, where we can pull together different silos that wouldn't necessarily be coming together. This curation job in the past has always been very manual, but I think with some clever technologies, it's going to open up opportunities that we simply cannot see and have never been able to see before. I mentioned earlier about this push towards more agility and having more partnerships involved in innovation programs. And it makes sense. If we want more options, we can, of course, continue to try and innovate everything ourselves, or we can go a little faster utilizing technologies or partnerships that have already made that investment and taken some risk. And this is the direction of travel a lot of organizations are taking when it comes to trying to foster more agility. Can we wrap our stuff around somebody else's proprietary work? The challenge, of course, is the pace of technological change is overwhelming. New organizations are popping up all the time, all around the world, and we have no clue whether we're actually working with the right companies or whether we should be actually working with some others. So trying to find the right emerging solutions within our available capacities, so we're not just searching the whole time, is again a massive opportunity for automation and AI crawlers that can explore the wider world and get a sense of what's happening out there and then curate for us interesting organizations that we should be talking to is a very valuable activity. So these are a selection of headaches. If you have any other headaches that I haven't expressed, please feel free to put them into the chat. Maybe we can talk about them in the question and answer session at the end. But these are the ones that I see most commonly cropping up within the innovation management world. I'm sure there are many others that you want to express, so feel free to chuck them into the chat if you think there are other innovation headaches that potentially are prime for AI support. So moving into the ibuprofen section of the topic. We can now generate ideas with the machines. So Brian kindly shared his example earlier of combining ideation activities where we complement human beings with AI, and we definitely agree. This is an area we can generate new ideas using AI, and we built this into our software a little while ago, where we can use this for seeding the process. I still think that the combination of human beings and machines is the answer. Not everything's written down. Some stuff's in our heads. And I'm going to come on to the problems areas. Not all information is available to the machines. A lot of data is restricted. And some of that maybe we have access to, maybe we don't. But I still think for quite some time, the answer is probably going to come from a combination of both sources. But the simple thing is we can generate AI-based ideas. Usually, I would say middle ranking level. They're not necessarily the best ideas that we see yet, but the technology has improved to such an extent now that this can complement what we ask human beings to do quite significantly and can certainly help stimulate more creativity. Images. Images tell, a picture tells 1,000 words, right? And I'm sure many of you have played around with things like ChatGPT. I was just playing around with my daughter recently, where she'd drawn a picture, a little character that she had created, and I fed that into ChatGPT, and I said, please turn this into like more of a rendering, like something you might see in an animation. And within a couple of minutes, I've got a fantastic picture, and I brought my 9-year-old daughter's picture to life. And anyone that hasn't tried out picture generation with AI tools, it's really exciting because you can be very, very specific and it's very quick to generate something that it works for you. What's great about this is because pictures are so critical to the creative process. We want to see as many images as we possibly can when we're sharing and our ideas and our concepts. That just create that visualization is so supportive of that creative process. And so now for a machine to be able to do that for us, so we don't have to get the pen and paper out and try and draw the damn thing or get it out in a PowerPoint presentation, is going to foster more creativity and again accelerate that process. And again, this is stuff that's there right now and available. Similarity, semantic searches and semantic ideation. Certainly in medium to large organizations, things are going to be expressed in different ways. And it's critical for us to be able to find those commonalities and group things that are essentially are the same rather than spend our time in parallel worlds working on essentially the same stuff but just expressed differently. Now in the past this is more difficult, but now again with AI this has been much more straightforward. So when it comes to ideation and concept development, the machines can really cluster and group things that are expressed in very different ways but are essentially the same. And when it comes to dealing with large quantities of data and making sure we're spending our evaluation time on the right stuff, this is very valuable indeed. And I think this is quite a step forward and removes a sort of a real blocker to processing larger amounts of data. This is very much in the automation realm of being able to click a button and say, cluster all of this stuff into meaningful combinations, meaningful themes, and as processing combinations of similar stuff rather than individual ideas or insights, perhaps. I touched on translation earlier. I don't want to dwell on this for too much longer, but I think the quality now of multi-language translation at speed is just so much better. And it means that the dream of having an environment where everybody can collaborate in their own native language, where we still have that nuance and the detail associated with how they want to express something is still retained, is really tremendous. I mean, we've had clients for long times where they've had, say, 20 different languages enabled within their platforms because the people they're dealing with simply don't speak the one corporate language, but we didn't want to exclude them. But as soon as you do that, you still need to work out through translation. And in the past, translation was good, but it wasn't perfect, and certain language combinations were better than others. But we've played around with things like Google Translate and DeepL, and with the quality now is so much better. And it's live and it's dynamic and it's quick. Again, automating this process. So that problem that I had before with that telecommunications company, wow, this would have been so much easier with the technologies available to us today. Semantic searches, intelligent search understands context. Understanding context is fantastic. Yeah. So again, connecting people with a wide variety of different ideas and insights and this kind of stuff that's been expressed in different kind of ways, building upon that point I mentioned before. Now, the next one I'm really excited about, and this is really assisting the innovators, and it's in the realm of the curation world. Because large amounts of innovation data, it's very difficult to see the wood for the trees. And there's a range of different topics that tend to come up. So topic one is, what is it we stocked that we should have potentially reviewed again? Maybe the technology didn't work before, but it might be working now. Where is it? Who has it? Where can we find it? This is a common conversation innovators have. And it's obviously very frustrating for innovators or people that have contributed to innovation programs to see something rejected because, hey, it wasn't quite right, but then can't seem to restart it even when the circumstances emerge. So that's one big topic. Second big topic is, what are the trends we see in our innovation data? So if we're allowing lots of departmental, local innovation to happen, and new ideas and concepts and insights are generated all the time, what are the trends that we're seeing across our organization? Because at the moment, that's typically impossible unless we can wrap everything with a machine and actually interpret that using some of the things we talked about, especially around semantic searches. We can unveil those hidden patterns, frankly, that we wouldn't be able to see manually. Now, innovation curation is not a new concept. In the past, we've seen people who would sit there at a desk and look at innovation data, and they would say, okay, what can I see in terms of trends? And the only way to see that is really to start doing some searches and seeing what kind of common themes pop up. It's very manual activity. Or they'd be looking to say, what is that one thing that's been implemented over there that could be transposed over here? Again, really difficult without just doing regular searches and very manual task. And the third big theme that I think is really interesting is, what are the individuals that are passionate about these topics? I can't share too much, but I had a client recently where they had two individuals that had common areas of interest, and they were 9 time zones apart. And when they engaged people to solve this particular problem online, these two people found each other, found that they had different pieces of a puzzle that, when connected together, could solve the problem. These people were never going to meet. They didn't even know each other existed, despite having both worked for the company for more than 15 years. So being able to automatically connect people with common interest to you that are working in your areas is a phenomenally exciting opportunity, because what we know about innovation is that bringing together those hunches, bringing together those people to engage them to collaborate is phenomenal. And the machine can now highlight for us, who should I be talking to that's interested in my topics? A few more screenshots here of how this stuff is going to work. But I mean, it is working right now. Actually, this is embedded into our tooling, and it's only being developed and developed and developed. But it really is phenomenally interesting to be able to visually represent our data in a way that enables us to spot things that we simply can't spot today. And this is only going to improve as it goes forward. But even as today, it is incredibly impactful and powerful. A couple of final things I want to touch on before we go into the limits that we see at the moment with AI. This is identification of partners. So this is a scouting tool that actually crawls publicly available data, and I want to come back to that point in a second. Publicly available data, and it curates innovative companies. So when an organization brings out something new, it's tagged as an innovative company, and then we take the publicly available data and we present that as part of a database of around 1 million companies, of organizations that potentially might be interesting. But what it does is it's like a very smart Google search. It just clears out all of the noise, but it can also automate the searching process. So if we're looking at a very sort of tight fringe case, and we want to say, okay, anytime anything new pops up that's interesting in this zone, I want once a month or once a week, I want you to highlight those new companies as they emerge. So we can listen without actually having to put energy into listening. The tool is going to do that work for us. So as we are starting to work more and more with external organizations to become more agile, identifying interesting technology companies, perhaps, we can monitor markets and entire landscapes much better than we ever have been before, which was very much a manual process of doing that scouting activity. We can automate scouting basically, which is tremendous. So there are some medication in terms of where AI has massive benefits. Let's now finish up. We're talking about the sort of limits of AI, or at least the current limits of AI. Now, you may see this differently to me, and if that's the case, great. I'm not the oracle on this. I don't believe I am anyway. But these are the limits that I'm seeing. It may be that you see it. Actually, these limits are stronger than this, or even weaker than what I express. But this is my perspective. And again, this could be a great discussion in the Q&A if you want to get into this topic in a bit more. And the first topic I want to dig into is access to data. An awful lot of data is held behind firewalls. It's restricted and is not available to the machines that are obviously searching and they are crawling that data. And when data is held behind firewalls and isn't accessible, it's not available as an input into the machine. So therefore, it can't be utilized. And so this is a limit to certain elements of automation and ideation. This is the biggest thing that holds the industry back right now. I had a conversation with Microsoft recently, and they showed me on one slide a visualization of all of the public data that was held in restricted ways, and it's tremendous. Now, that is a limit to what we can do, but there are workarounds to that process. What Hyper's decided to do is to actually integrate into trusted data sources wherever possible. So, patent databases and trend databases and stuff that people would license out to pay for, and then give the machine access to that to help utilize that data that's held behind firewalls. But there is a limit to what you can do, of course. But this is, again, the single most important thing that I think is holding and limiting what AI can do right now. The second thing, and that's a little bit easy to get your head around, is the fact that we don't write everything down. We are, as people, we are the result of our experiences and of our work and our hobbies and our social lives. And there's all kinds of stuff in our head that we never even think to write down. But actually, when presented with a particular challenge or a particular problem to solve or an opportunity, then it all comes flowing out. And we can see All right. Oh, this is interesting. Yeah, I can apply this piece of knowledge and that piece of knowledge, but it won't necessarily be something that machine is able to look at. And this is one of the reasons why I think the human being and the machine will come together in order to be the answer for a lot of more creative pieces. It will be augmenting and assisting more so than replacing in terms of creativity elements, because not everything's written down. And one of the things that's not written down, but we could write down, and I think this is a temporary limit to AI, because I think we will get better at this, is assets and competencies and expressing what assets and competencies we have as organizations. Now, this is a key tenet of becoming more agile. If we're going to exploit our core competencies in different ways, we need to know what we're good at. And an example I often use is McDonald's, right? So they make burgers, but are they the best burger maker in the world? Probably not. Most of us can make a better burger. So how are they so successful? Well, it's because their assets and competencies are different. So they are tremendous at real estate and they're tremendous at logistics. Make a really good case McDonald's should be in the logistics business. They just happen to go into burgers. Now, if an organization wants to become more agile, it needs to have a clarity on what are our assets and our competencies. Our assets might be space, it might be intellectual property, it could be a global manufacturing capability. For the machine to be able to tell us where we should go and innovate, it needs to know what our assets and our competencies are. And these aren't always written down. We know what we sell, it's not necessarily the same thing. Now, the reason I think this is going to be a temporary limit to AI is because I'm seeing organizations starting to care more about this. They're auditing their assets and their competencies, and they're looking at whether they can identify and express those for everybody's benefit so they can become more agile and pivot more. So I think this is only temporary. It's also a key element of some of the elements of ISO 56000. So those of you who are familiar with the innovation management standard, understanding what you're good at is part of that puzzle, or it certainly could be part of that puzzle. So I think this will be something that improves in the future. Moving on to weak signals. I talked earlier about clustering things that were common, identifying synergies between things that maybe were expressed differently, but actually AI has some limitations when it comes to those weaker signals. And this is where it's connecting what the person knows and what the data says seems to still resonate. So where you're seeing these emerging trends where there's not a lot of evidence for something, that's usually where your own imagination and the piece of data tends to come together. So far, our experiences are that there's some limitations to AI's ability to deal with those weaker signals. Again, this one might improve. I suspect it probably will, especially with the progressions in quantum computing. But at the moment, there seems to be an area of weakness. So you talk about idea generation. This is kind of a summary of some of the things that we put on before, which is, again, we tend to find it's good for sort of medium stage quality ideas, but it's not necessarily as good as the human being plus the machine still. So we haven't yet got to the point where we think we can completely replace the person in idea generation. That might change, but I think because of the access to data issue, because of the fact that information is not written down, because of the lack of processing weak signals, that's probably going to be a challenge for quite some time. So I suspect that one's going to sustain. Decision making. Again, considering organizational limits and context. Again, if we don't have those expressed in written form, the machine's not using the data to help filter out what it's seeing. This is usually stuff that isn't necessarily expressed. And again, this might be temporary. This is something we could get better at, making sure we use this to train our own machines. But at the moment, again, there seems to be a limit of being able to actually make really good decisions. What we do find though is AI is good at making the initial triaging. You can sort out the trash, right? You can get rid of that stuff quite well. But in terms of those final detailed decision-making processes, we see something that people are still better at that because they have that organizational limits and context and clarity about assets and competencies a little bit more, but often it's in their heads. And the final point I want to make, and this is actually a really interesting one, is the multi-organizational innovation projects, because this is on the rise. But because it's multi-organizational, what we're then talking about is more silos of data, more silos of people, and therefore more limitations in terms of what a machine can feasibly do. Things like culture and security start to become very important when we talk about bringing combinations of organizations together to innovate. And again, we're not seeing necessarily the machine being able to help with that right now. There may be some opportunities to improve it, but I think this is, again, is always going to be a limit. While we work for separate organizations, we always have separate data, we'll have restrictions and protections around what we do. Of course, there is a scenario where we become more organic, we're more what's the agile as the organization is. Some people call it the elastic enterprise. I've heard that phrase used in the past. And if you're wondering what that means, think about how films or video games are made. You have the separation between money and production and creativity. And I'm starting to see slices of that starting to penetrate organizations. And if we move to that extreme in regular corporations, which I don't foresee in the short term, then we may see this also becomes interesting in terms of what machines can do for us there. But I think this is an area for us to explore. So one final thing before I just summarize what we talked about today. This is just a representation of all the stuff that our technologists have been doing around those different areas of machine learning and smart tools and generative AI. You can see it's really ripples through the entire innovation workflow, whether it's around strategy or discovery stuff or putting stuff into practice. Lots of AI baked into an innovation management process. So this is what we're working on, and I'm sure there's other things that we are adding to our roadmap as we progress, but this gives you some sense of just how deeply AI is being embedded into the innovation journey. So don't feel free to read every element of this, but it just gives you a sense of where this is going. So just before we get to Q&A, some general observations here. Automation makes innovation better. There is no two ways about it. AI is helping making us more innovative, more creative, and include more people and be able to process that quantity of data that we can generate when we are engaging with medium to large organizations. It's helping us interpret the data, curate the data, and it's helping us to pull out signals and trends and things that we simply couldn't see before. So right now, today, AI is helping making the lives of innovation managers better, but it's not done. As you can see, there's a number of different areas where there are opportunities still to improve, some opportunities that I think we cannot even foresee right now. But the pace of technological change is so fast, of course, that even 3 months down the road, the picture will look differently. But I think what you can see here is that AI does present massive opportunities to deliver more value within the innovation management world. Yes, there are some limits, but not significant enough to not do it. It's just a question of how much we can really reasonably expect out of that process. So I see we put some questions in, which is great. Just a reminder, if you like what you've seen and you want to give us a bit of feedback, please take a picture of that QR code and then give us some feedback. And as I said, we will be picking 1 or 2 people out of a random hat in order to receive a free consultation on any innovation topic you want to explore. And I love doing these. These are fantastic for me. I learn things and I hope people learn from me. Well, basically, we have a really good chat for about 45 minutes to an hour about any topic you like. And we start sharing best practices and examples from others. And I try and make connections for people where possible as well. So it's a great fun for me. Helps with me with my content creation as well and some of the books that I'm writing. So I love doing them. And if it's interesting to you, please do fill in the survey. So I'm just going to have a look at our questions and see if there's anything I can add. I am not the most technical person in the world. You probably pick this up through the way that I talk about these things, but I am a part of the process. So let's look at something that Brian shared here. One tremendous headache was summarizing qualitative interviews, for example, focus groups. Yeah, researching the potential of specific models, growth strategies. AI has been great. Yeah, fantastic. So yeah, processing large amounts of data, amazing. And I've heard this before. Organizations using it to deal with survey data. You may have hundreds of people that have completed surveys and teasing out the key learning points and the trends from that is just a massive opportunity for automation. So yeah, tremendous example there. Something else here, we found AI can be pretty good at ideation when prompted with different creative or invention models. Yeah, for example, Triz, results when used as a team ideation stimuli. Interesting. Yeah, so I think you're right. I'm a big believer in these sorts of methodologies as well. And I think this is where the human being and the machine need to come together is what's the right method for the circumstances that we face, and where can we augment that with AI to supercharge that process? As I said, we have found some limitations in terms of regular ideation with AI. It's pretty good, but it's not great, is what I would say in some very simplistic terms. What ways AI being used in prototyping? So interesting. So what you've probably seen is organizations using things like digital twins and creating representations of something before they actually put it into practice. So machines can create code, as you've probably seen already, Gina. if we can create a representation of something without having to necessarily build it, and we can use AI as a way of accelerating that process, then that's pretty exciting. It's interesting, people that go and getting computer science degrees, and actually the machines can now write code. We just need to give it some stimulus. So I think that's the most significant area of prototyping that I've seen. But I will check back with some colleagues to see other examples and maybe come back to you on that point, because I think it's an interesting one. I suspect also there are opportunities for validation with potential customers. So we could validate a concept without necessarily putting it in front of somebody. I haven't quite seen it yet, but I suspect that's where certain things are going. Okay, Dan, what are the most underutilized applications for AI relative to the value they can currently deliver? Forget about tomorrow, talking about today's capabilities. I think it's simple as curation. Curation is the big one. It's that processing innovation data. I had a meeting with a very famous consumer goods organization a couple of weeks ago, and they had a data lake of innovation data that's been built up over years and years and years, but they couldn't do anything with it, right? They didn't have a model to interpret that. And the reason we had the meeting was to see if they could use some of the stuff. And I'll skip back a little bit to the visualizations you saw earlier. This kind of thinking. And if we can plug that innovation data into these models that we can then create those visualizations. Now, you've also got to then make the step in terms of insight gathering, right? So presenting something's one thing, but how do we pick out the insights? And the big things were the trends, data trends over time. If we could see a particular theme and how it's emerging over time, and identify some of those weak signals with a bit of human being interaction as well, this is a massive opportunity. The technology exists today, and of course the data exists in many cases, or we can pull it from multiple sources and feed it into the machine. So this, to me, is the biggest opportunity, is exploiting the data that we already have. The other thing that I would observe is that when it comes to curation, an awful lot of stuff we stopped in the past because the technology wasn't ready may now be possible. But unless we're looking at those previous concepts, it's very difficult to see. But if we have that in a data source somewhere, then that's easier for a machine to identify. So can we reignite things that previously just were imagination, were vision, were concepts which never actually went anywhere? Doesn't mean they were bad ideas, it just meant we weren't ready for them. Using these sorts of models can help wake up and identify some of that stuff that just simply was static and stored, sat on the shelf, if you like. Great questions. Any other questions for anybody that I want to dig into today? Great discussion, everybody. Thank you for the questions and the topics. All right, I'll give you another couple of minutes just to put anything forward.
In the meantime, I just wanted to let you guys know that we're having another knowledge session next month. It's not out yet, but you'll get a little sneak peek of the topic. So I'm sure you're having sometimes difficulties winning top management support. So it's all going to be about that. So it's how to win over top management, secure support for your innovation initiative. So be on the lookout for the email. We'll send you an invite for next month.
Maybe one additional answer to Dan's question is the crawling technology, identifying companies that potentially could help us. And when you've got millions and millions of organizations out there that are bringing new capabilities to market all of the time, it's just an overwhelming task. So if you're even an experienced scout, maybe you're in the pharma sector or the automotive sector, these consumer goods, these are organizations that employ scouts all the time to identify things. It's still a laborious manual job. And the more we can automate that, the better. And that is something, again, that's available today to help automate that process and slicken up that searching process. It's just a massive capacity win. All right, I think we're dry for questions. So thank you ever so much for everyone that's joining. As a quick reminder, please do fill in the survey. Bit of feedback always helps us make these things as good as they possibly can be. And you do get drawn into a hat for a free consultation. We will provide you with some feedback and slides and the content and all that stuff after this session from Sonia. Also, we'll provide a list of some of the previous webinars we've done this year, which I hope you find of interest. We get really great feedback on these, and we love the discussion and debate. It really helps us as well to be in this discussion. So wonderful. Thank you ever so much for
Thank you,
joining.
Colin.
And